welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Today's episode of Earth Feels is a little bit different because Rose and I were guests on a different podcast this week entitled Down the Garden Path, and its hosts are Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing. They are both landscape designers and gardeners, and they are looking for the month of October at the topic of climate change. So they have a weekly podcast, and this past Monday was the launch of this new topic. And so for today's Earth Feels episode, we are just going to include a few excerpts from the hour-long conversation we had with Matthew and Joanne. And then in the show notes and on our website, you'll find a link to listen to the entire conversation if you want to hear more. So thanks for tuning in, and let's get right into the conversation we had with Matthew and Joanne over at Down the Garden Path.
Well, welcome to the show. We are excited. It's a deep topic. We realize that, and we only have an hour. And but Matt and I really wanted to explore this theme this month, and so why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about why you started your podcast?
Well, how weird do you want to get? Christine and I have an interesting relationship in that we were supposed to meet a number of different times. We actually went through training, Al Gore's climate reality training in Toronto back in 2015.
Yes.
But we didn't meet there.
Although we were about 2 tables apart from each other, we found out 2 years later.
Oh, yeah, wow. Christine actually has a picture of me sitting at a different table. She's like taking a picture of her husband, and I'm in the foreground. But we didn't meet there. So it's kind of a serendipitous synchronicity kind of thing. We met several years later in San Diego, and we both had this climate training in common, although neither one of us were working in climate at the time. But it was a point of meeting for the two of us. Anyway, we kept in touch about climate, and I was watching David Attenborough's excellent documentary, Our Planet, one night, and I got this voice that said, text Christine and ask her if she wants to do a podcast.
Oh, wow.
Which sounds very weird, I know that. And but I listened to my intuition, and so I texted her right away, and 20 minutes later she said, yeah, I'd be interested.
And that was in May of 2019. And for about a year, I'd been thinking, I'd like to do a podcast, but I don't know exactly what, because I have kind of a wide-ranging interest, and I don't want to do it by myself. So then when Rose texted me, I'm like, I guess I'm going to do a climate change podcast with Rose. Cool.
Yeah. And I had no idea what a podcast was because I'd never even listened to one until that point. But
you still came up with the idea.
We came up with the idea, and yeah, that was like in May, and I think we did our first. There's a lot of technical stuff, as you guys know. We did our first podcast in July of 2019, so a little over a year ago.
Yeah, we're not the experienced experts you folks are.
No, we don't have 6 years under our belts, but
yeah, it's been a long time. We've been talking. I've been talking, and it is much harder to do it by yourself for sure. Which is why I was really excited 2 years in when Matt joined me, and it was much easier.
I couldn't imagine doing it by myself.
Yeah. I've left you a few times. You've done a few by yourself. I've abandoned you.
Oh, yeah.
We have a little funny story about Matt and I. So we've been doing the show for quite a while together, only to discover, and we'd known each other through both at a nursery and through mutual friends and stuff. And Matt had been a guest on the show as well. And then we discovered that we actually are born on the same day.
Ah!
I know. He's like,
Stars are aligning.
I know. So it's just kind of one of those freaky things. Like, what do you mean yesterday was your birthday? Yeah, it was my birthday.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So it's kind of, yes, where little things happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So back to climate though. So the Al Gore climate training must have been very interesting.
Yeah, climate reality is what he calls it. And actually, we both went through in 2015. Christine wrote a book right after that. Is that correct, Christine?
Mm-hmm. And have a book called Unfreeze Yourself. And it's about how to address climate change.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
because it does seem like most people, it's such a big topic, and that's something I think we both realize. It's such a big topic that, and such a scary topic. People don't want to look at it. They would rather bury their heads in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And so our goal, understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. So our goal with our podcast is just to get people talking, just to make the conversation happen.
Yeah, Matt, we've always felt that way too, that we, didn't feel qualified to talk about it, even though it affects our jobs and our livelihoods and the impact that we see. But yet even though we work in it in outside, with plants and things like that, we didn't feel qualified to talk about it. Even on the show, we've, broached it a little bit slightly, but we just feel unqualified. And it does seem like such a big topic. And I think for homeowners, like everybody, or just your average person, it's just out there, right? It's the icebergs and it's the California fires, and it's bigger than us individually. And I think there comes a time where we have to realize that it's got to start somewhere. And Christine, like you said, you had to start with you. Like, it has to start with us. So I think that's why we felt it was worthy of dedicating a whole month to do a deeper dive on climate and the environmental impact. And so we were really happy that you guys agreed to join us.
Well, and we really appreciate you using this platform, which, like you say, it is connected to climate change, but it's not directly connected. You could have avoided it if you tried, and you didn't. So thank you for that.
And I think it's important to note that we're not experts either. I don't think you need to be an expert. I think that's part of the bugaboo about it, is people feel like if they get involved and someone asks them a question and they don't know the answer, it's so big. But the whole, it's evolving all the time. We're learning more about what's happening, what we're doing to our planet all the time. And so there is maybe Al Gore's an expert, but even those of us that have been through climate training, we're not experts. We're all learning. And it's just having the conversation to further the discussion, to further the education of the average person.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, when I started my podcast in 2009, it's less so now because of the fires and the floods that are happening and the melting. It's hard to avoid, but it really, climate change felt like an elephant in the room that you just didn't talk about. And in fact, so I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but in my book I say it's like bringing up climate change at that time was like farting out loud in public. People would like look away, pretend you hadn't said anything, like change the topic. It was really this weird kind of experience. It makes people really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe that's changing because...
Do you think it is though? Like, I think it's still like, even I'm like, what are people going to write in tonight, or what are people thinking? And that's not right.
Interesting. I don't know, Rose, what you think. I think it's changing, but partly it didn't take me long to realize, okay, I don't really care what people think of me. Like, if this is my children's future, and so would I rather be embarrassed, or would I rather do what I can for a livable future for my kids? That's kind of what it comes down to, because it is embarrassment. It's weird but we're social creatures, and we don't like to be embarrassed. And so I kind of got over it early on in my journey, because a few months into blogging, I met somebody online who was in your area, I think Kitchener, so a little bit further than you folks. But at that time in the Canadian Parliament, there was a Climate Accountability Act going through. It was a minority parliament, and he started fasting. And he called his campaign "Starving for Change." He was so concerned about climate change. So as it went through the Senate, he fasted and tried to get media attention to the fact that this was so important. And so I heard about that, and I thought, "Ooh, I'm not going to go without food for three weeks or how can I do that?" So what's the next hardest thing other than starving that I can do?
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? Going and talking to strangers about climate change is the hardest thing. So I became the climate change evangelist, if you will, in my neighborhood. I was living in Winnipeg at the time temporarily with my daughter who was going to school. Yeah, so I went door knocking, and
that is scary.
It is
very scary.
Pretty scary, and I would recommend that people do it if you're going to get over any fears. That's a really good way of getting over any fears of being embarrassed, because it's pretty embarrassing, but I did it anyways, and I had some really interesting conversations. I had some doors shut in my face. I had some people say carbon dioxide is good for plants. What are you worried about? That sort of thing. But I also, and so maybe you guys can address that, being gardeners and landscapers. How good is CO2 for plants? It's my answer is, so is manure, but you don't want your house full of it. So
It's a good one.
So anyways, that's my little story about how I just have, it doesn't bother me anymore to talk about climate change, obviously.
I think you're right, though, Joanne. I mean, I feel very blessed that I have Christine to talk to about this. And obviously my partner at home hears me talk about it all the time. But many of my friends they're not trained in climate. And I know when I start talking about it, I can see the eyes glaze over. So I think it's still not front and forward. It's becoming more so. I do agree with Christine that it's not probably where it was in 2009 when she started out. But I look at Al Gore and I think he's been talking about this since, I don't know what, early 2000s. And I'm just like, how does he keep going? How did he keep going when people were just giving him crap all the time about it? I want to say about the climate training, I just went back and took the training again. So 5 years in the interim. And the changes that have happened to the earth in those 5 years are pretty sobering. And we're really not there yet in terms of taking action. I think people like Greta Thunberg, I'm sure you guys know who Greta Thunberg is. Okay. Yeah. I think she's got the whole youth behind her, and rightfully so. I mean, they're the ones who are inheriting this problem that we and generations since the Industrial Revolution started have created. We need to ramp up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're giving her just as hard of a time as Al Gore. You know, it's really
they are.
sad to see them treat a child that way.
Yeah, she doesn't seem as bothered by it, though. I think that's part of her Asperger's, is that she just doesn't care what people think.
Yeah.
She has to have a thing.
Yeah, definitely. How do we simplify it for the average person then? Have you, in your year of doing the podcast, have you figured out a way to kind of break it down for people who think it's, a much bigger, even though it is a much bigger issue, it still is in front of us.
So do you mean what can we each do, or to define it? What are you thinking?
Well, I can say both. Can I say both? Well, let's define it. Maybe start off with the definition, and then we can move on to ways that we can all maybe do our little part to help.
Well, we basically define climate change as the man-made changes to the environment that have been accelerating since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, primarily because of the burning of fossil fuels, certainly agricultural farms, huge methane emitters. There's a very thin atmosphere that's around the earth, almost like an eggshell. And we have been heating up inside of that eggshell so that our atmosphere is getting higher and higher parts per million of carbon. Right now, I think we're at 4.8. I think we hit 418 in the last week.
Well, it's around 411 right now, which is about 10 points higher than it was last year at this time. So,
okay.
And when I started blogging, it was at 385. So 350 is where the science says we should be to keep the stable climate that we're all used to. That's sort of the industrial agricultural society that we're used to, that sort of developed over the last 10,000 years. That's a real sweet zone. And it's the Earth will still be around when it's just what's going to happen to us when weather gets more chaotic. That's what we're concerned about. The Earth will be okay. She'll heal. She's been around for a long time before us. She'll be around after us. So what do we want? What kind of future do we want for our children and grandchildren, I guess, is the question, and future generations. And so, like Rose says, we're putting these heat trapping gases in. We didn't know, it was the Industrial Revolution was a wonderful thing. We wouldn't be sitting here chatting. There's so many wonderful things that it brought us, but now we never have done this as a society, and in this big a way had this big a change. And so there's so much inertia in the system to keep it going the way that it's going. Mm-hmm. So to turn that, and by inertia, it's also a lot of economic interests, obviously. And so how do you put the brakes on and pivot? And I don't want people to think that it's all bad news. There's a lot of bad news, but Rose and I really like to focus on the fact that this is an opportunity why wouldn't we want cleaner water? Why wouldn't we want cleaner air? Why, why wouldn't we want more equality? Because without oil to fight over, why wouldn't we want more peace in the world? There's so much that this shift towards cleaner everything is going to give us, and that's the exciting part. Unfortunately, humans have a hard time with change.
Yeah, we do, and money involved and stuff as well. It definitely, big business is really the challenge. So Matt, looks like we have a few listener questions.
We do indeed. So going into our questions, we've got Patty has written in, hello Joanne, Matthew, and guests. What a great topic tonight. I tuned in expecting to hear about someone's lawn or tree problem, but this topic is great. Thank you so much for discussing, and stay healthy. Thank you, Patty, for writing in. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We've also got Sean, who has written in. And it was probably a little bit ago when Christine had mentioned it, but Sean says Christine has a book out, ? Yay, Christmas gifts, ! How and where? So Christine, how can our guests get a hold of your book?
Okay, well, we're in Canada, so I don't know if there's a McNally Robinson in Southern Ontario, but it's on Amazon as well. Okay. So it's called Unfreeze Yourself.
Tom has written in. He says, hello, great show, great topic. What is the difference between climate change and global warming? Thanks.
Well, there's kind of a mix of the two. Global warming is a result of climate change. We're finding that temperatures are getting warmer, which changes the weather patterns, which makes for more droughts in certain areas, more rain in certain areas, more the atmosphere as it heats up holds more moisture in the atmosphere. So then it's the tornadoes and hurricanes that come through are holding more moisture, then dumping more moisture. So creating more floods and that kind of thing. So they are very interconnected. But one is more global heating is a result of climate change, I would say.
I mean, it's like I'm back. Sorry about that.
Welcome.
It's like
she'll correct me when I'm wrong. She always plays devil's advocate, and she knows more than I do. So
no. But just to the warming part is like that blanket of heat trapping gas that we've been pumping out in the form of fossil fuels and methane and nitrous oxide is like a blanket. We've put a blanket around Mother Earth, and now she's getting a fever. And so, my background is in nursing, and so you can have a fever for a while, and you start to show signs of being unwell, and that's what's happening with the droughts and the fires and the floods. Like the earth is unwell, and but if your fever gets too high, that's it. And so that's where we're going. The thermometers are rising, and we want to talk about how we can change that. And it can feel really overwhelming for one person. And one thing that I haven't mentioned is in 2010, 3 of us up here in Canada brought in an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby. So me and 2 other women. I'm no longer actively involved with that, but if people are interested in a very specific focus, we're going to be talking about gardening because actually food is a really important part of addressing climate change. But honestly, using your voice, having conversations with the people around you, and frankly, your MPP here in Ontario and your MP in Canada, in the US, it would be what?
Your legislators, your congressmen, your senators,
congresspeople,
your president.
Yeah.
That's a whole other show, Rose.
Yeah. But Citizens Climate Lobby helps people organize to meet with their local politicians, provincial and federal. So I've lobbied in Ottawa, in Parliament. I've lobbied at Queen's Park. I've gone to Washington, D.C. Rose has never even been lobbied at Washington, D.C.
No, I have not.
So it's just important because until politicians hear loud and clear, this is not okay. Because you know what? The fossil fuel lobbyists are in there every day, practically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So lobby.
With money too, like that's the thing, right? So it's our voices can only go so far, I feel.
You know what? But they have to get reelected. So and actually I saw news today that there is a solar and wind company that now is valued at higher than Exxon Mobil, which used to be the richest company on the planet. So things are shifting. This is, in some ways, it's like, wow, really interesting times. We all chose to be here, apparently.
Yeah, definitely.
Subscribe to that worldview.
Yeah, and I think our voice is getting back to what Christine was saying. I think our voices are more important now than ever, because unless you're letting your legislators know that this is important to you, why would they spend their time and money on it? But the minute you tell them this is one of the things that you're going to be voting on, that gives them the impetus to be creating new laws and to be listening to what other countries are doing. If we say nothing, then it's just the status quo.
Yeah.
To listen to the rest of Rose and my conversation with Joanne and Matt over at Down the Garden Path, click on the link in the description to their podcast. And we went on to discuss solutions and to answer audience questions. So we had a lot of fun. So a big shout out to Matthew and Joanne for having us on. And so the good news has been touched on already in our conversation. This week's good news is that the world's largest solar and wind power generator, Next Energy, which is based in Florida, has surpassed ExxonMobil in stock market value, which reflects obviously investors' bets on a changing energy system and an uncertain outlook for oil demand. So how about a big hooray for that? And our action tip today If you are in the US, vote, vote, vote. And if you're not sure how to do that, we'll include a link to make sure you're registered to vote and to make sure you haven't passed the deadline to register in your state. We'll include that link along with the video that's just been put out by the League of Conservation Voters about how big oil knew about the climate science years ago, and to give you a little bit even more impetus to vote if you don't have enough already. So action tip is to vote. Of course, here in Canada, there's provincial elections going on in BC and Saskatchewan. So it's important to vote there as well. And for our sanity tip, I'm just going to share a simple calming tip, and it's very grounding as well, that I use during my sessions with clients. So what you need to do is just take your right hand and place it on your heart area. And with your right hand there, move it down to the left and up to the right in a circle. So you are going clockwise, and you're actually, resting it on your chest, so you can feel it. You're making contact with it. And as you are circling around, making the circling motion with your hand in your chest area, you're just going to say, I love and accept myself. I love and accept, continuing in this circle, clockwise circle, down to the left, up to the right. I love and accept myself with all of the mistakes I've made in my life. I accept all of my gifts and talents. I accept all of my feelings about everything. And then take a nice big breath. You can relax your hand and rinse and repeat this as often as you want, just to relax yourself, to feel grounded, and to help move any emotions that might be getting stuck in your system. Like, I don't know, stress and fear and anger, that is kind of par for the course these days. So I hope that helps.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for